Thank you, Ruchita. You have covered several areas relating to India's engagement with Africa. You have mentioned about the kind of engagement that India is having with Africa in different health-related issues, specific diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV. You have also mentioned about the kind of human assistance that India has been extending to Africa. Then the issue of imports, role of private um, public partnership in terms of medical tourism, external financing, and also Pan-African e-network. So these are the major areas I think that can really help in terms of strategizing our policies towards South-South cooperation. So now I would invite Dr. Barnabe Mala Kalja. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Mohandi. Thank you to all my friends of RIS. Happy to be here again, Process, and to be back in India. Well, I want to share some ideas and to highlight 4 points on South-South cooperation in science and technology, particularly reference to the Argentine experience in nuclear medicine. The first point is on the nature of South-South cooperations in science and technologies. The second, on the nuclear medicine experience and the Argentine company INVAP exports on radioisotopes research reactors. The fourth is the case of Indian and Argentinian cooperation. And the third one. And the fourth one is about the contribution of South-South cooperation for scaling up the implementation of SDGs. Well, let me refer to the nature of South-South cooperation in comparison with South-South technical cooperation. This is the point. South-South cooperation is in science and technologies, which are the specificities of this type of cooperations. This is about exchange in sophisticated knowledge, scientific knowledge. So this is one of the points. The second one is that scientists are key actors. So it's common as the initiative in South-South cooperation in science and technology to be a bottom-up initiative. Let me show this in an example. In 1970, Jorge Alberto Sabato, he was a nuclear scientist and technology from the Argentina's Nuclear National Commission, participates in an international congress like this, like the Delhi process, in Geneva, and he will sit on the chair that indicates in alphabetical order Argentina, the name of his country. So next to him, there is another nuclear scientist. He is from Algeria. Argentina, Algeria are after Algeria in the alphabet, but the thing was repeat every year. They sit each other, so then became friends. And they will keep their friendship for years. This is an example of scientific cooperation, bottom-up an example. Because 15 years later, in 1985, Argentina and Algeria signed a nuclear cooperation agreement. Argentina helps to construct a research reactor in Algeria. And a radioisotope plant. So Argentina scientists went to Algeria to share their experience and knowledge, and this became South-South cooperation scale because it involves technical, scientific, and technological cooperation, export, so trade, and investment. So this is what Sachin Chaturvedi says, the development compact. It's a modality or combination of modalities. So the another difference is the conceptual difference between South-South cooperation, science and technology, and technical cooperation. Technical cooperation is about capacity building, and South-South cooperation in science and technology is more than capacity building. It involves what Jorge Alberto Sabato said, the triangle, the Sabatos triangle. What is it? This is a conceptual definition of the three elements of South-South cooperation in science and technology. The first one is the state. The second is a productive structure, and the third one is the scientific and technological infrastructure. These elements are government, industry, and university, are what mainstream literature identified as the triple helix. This is the Sabatos triangle. So the question is, how did, in the case of nuclear medicine, how did nuclear medicine contribute to the improvement and access to health in many cases? The first one has to do with the first answer that I want to point out is about the contribution of research reactors and radioisotope plants for capacity building, knowledge change, but also to produce radiopharmaceuticals that are used in nuclear medicine. So, as you say, nuclear medicine uses radiation to provide diagnostic information about the functioning of persons, a specific organ, or to treat them. Radiotherapy can be used to treat some medical conditions, especially cancer, using radiation to weaken or destroy particular targeted cell. Over 40 million nuclear medicine procedures are performed each year. The demand for radioisotopes is increasing at up to 5% annually. In the case of Argentina, this modality has a large trajectory. Argentina is one of the most active nuclear supply countries in the world. Argentina has an active nuclear cooperation agreement with countries from South America, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East since 1970s. Over the course of the 3 decades, the country gained a prominent position to compete with the most advanced industrialized nations in the realm of research reactors and radioisotopes plants. And the last case is the export of a radioisotope plant to India. This year, during the Argentine president's official visit to India, President Macri inaugurated a radioisotope plant in Mumbai. This plant was being constructed since 2014, and it cost $35 million. It's located, as I said, in Mumbai. And I want to highlight this point because India is currently importing molybdenum from Russia and Belgium. And from the plant that will design in BAP in Mumbai, India will be able to produce it locally. India will produce molybdenum here. So this will change the condition of India from an import country of molybdenum to a producer. But it's also very important to highlight another 4 more points that the agreement includes. The first one is about the exchange between technical and technology staff. The second was about the supplies of materials. The third one about the development of technological systems and projects. And the fourth one about the laboratories, common laboratories that will be generate the cooperation between both countries. This will generate national ownership in India, because India will receive information and learning on nuclear research from Argentine technologies, and Argentina will support the development of an indigenous, broad-based scientific and technological infrastructure in India. Well, this is an example that will be involved in the next years. But let me finish with the question that was posed by some of the panelists today. Why SciSac cooperation in science and technology, particularly in the health sector, is important to the contribution of scaling up the implementation of SDGs? Why is relevant? And the reason has to do with the SciSac cooperation in science and technology as a broader system than capacity building. The first one, or the first point that I want to highlight, is about the scale and the development of the service sector, the technological companies, or what Sabato said, the triangle, the trade and investment. SciSac cooperation in science and technology in the health sector will contribute to access to sophisticated knowledge, as I said, the development of human talent, scientific communities, and technological capacities. Third one, access to multi-purpose technology. This is what in the literature identified as general purpose technology. Because it provides opportunity for strengthening health policy, but more and more sectors in the public policy area. Strengthening of the states. The third one has to do with the promotion of science diplomacy. The role of nuclear scientists can go beyond the giving of information or being consulted about scientific policy. On occasion, they can be capable of mobilizing themselves to become temporary international political actors or science diplomats. This is an interesting point that can be involved in this modality. The fourth one has to do with inequalities and how can SciSac cooperation, science and technology can contribute to reduce inequalities. This is close to one of the SDGs and the access perspective. It will be possible to reduce inequalities and vulnerabilities across and within our countries without strengthening indigenous capacity and encouraging the transfer of new technology and knowledge required for the effective implementations. So, SciSac cooperation in science and technology offer a great potential for tackling the multiple dimensions of poverty, which beyond income also encompass access to health, housing, and employment and quality education. So, this is the point, the 4 points I wanted to highlight, and let me sincerely appreciate your attention today.
Thank you very much. You have covered many issues, primarily 4 issues: nuclear medicine, India, Argentina cooperation in the medical sector, implementation of SDGs, and South-South cooperation in science and technology. Besides, you also made a very significant distinction between capacity and technical cooperation. It's very important. and also refer to cooperation among southern countries in terms of lab development, in terms of supply of raw materials. So these are very important issues. Now I would like to invite Mr. Danev Ricardo Perez Bellerin. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Moharty. I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Chaturvedi and his team in RIS for the invitation to be here with my colleagues, experts in this panel. I would like to share with you a personal experience in 1 minute and a half that could be very interesting for all of you. 16 years ago, I was a degree from the university. I studied radiochemistry and began to work in my company, in the company that I'm still working today, as a young researcher in a lab. And during the first 4 or 5 years, I was working in this lab as one of the young researchers trying to follow up some projects, scientist projects for new candidate vaccines against different diseases. Then in a moment of the life, one day, I received the invitation of the general director of the company to talk with her. And this person that today for me is a personal person, is like a second mother, she suggested to me to try to quit from the lab and try to do a new step in my professional career, and in order to begin to work with her on international relations and basically in the structure of collaboration of the company with other companies and with regulatory authorities, etc. At that time, for me, it was a very difficult decision because I was very, very young, and it was a very complex job. But then this person, Professor Dr. Concepcion Campa Huergo, she gave to me a book, and she told me, try to read this book, and I am sure that you will be in love immediately with this job. This book was written at that time by a group of experts in South-South collaboration, a group of experts that was led at that time by Professor Hala, here in this panel. And I need to say that I read the book in 48 hours. And immediately I called to Dr. Campa and I say to her, okay, let's go into do it. And since that moment, I began to work in this job, trying to follow up, to strengthen the relationship, the international relations, the collaboration of this company with other companies worldwide and with different international organizations. Today, we have in a very interesting scenario. 30 years ago, was impossible to consider that in developing countries, some companies could introduce vaccines or biopharmaceutical products in the market, because at that time only the big pharma had the power to do that. Today, as some of our colleagues have explained here, there are some companies and institutions and international organizations that support the development of new alliances, new structures, new companies in order to do that. The example of Brazil, the example of China, India, Cuba as well. And in my personal point of view, in terms of contribution of manufacturing, strengthening health sector, a very good example is this VMNN, the developing countries vaccine manufacturing network. This is a network where involved, that in this network are included some of the companies in those countries that produce vaccines, mainly vaccines, for developing countries. This network today, the current CIO is the general manager of Biological E, a vaccine company based in Hyderabad, Telangana state. But there is a board of directors, a board of key people from different countries that yearly organize a meeting every year in a different country. And the most key people from this network attend to this meeting in order to identify new projects of collaboration between them, in order to identify how to knock the door to the international funds in order to open new projects of collaboration in the vaccine field. On the other hand, those companies try to find new ways to entry in the vaccine market using some mechanisms of collaboration instead of competition. This is a very interesting mechanism, because today, this is a personal point of view, today in the health sector we need to consider that it's impossible to develop new products for the people if we continue to identify this separation between public sector and private sector. If a country, any country would like to invest on health sector, on biopharmaceutical industry, it's very important the political will. Without political will, it's impossible to do that. And the political will include the relationship, the good partnership between public sector and private sector. There are some examples, real examples, that in the last 5-6 years allow to different countries to invest on health sector in order to raise new capacities for producing new vaccines and new biopharmaceutical products. But of course, as some of my colleagues have said before, this is a very difficult sector because you need not only political will, you need also a huge quantity of money to invest. And to invest not only in production capacities, you need to invest also in the knowledge, in the human resource, in the technical assistance for those people that will work on those facilities for producing vaccines. And in this scenario, the South-South collaboration is key. It's very important. I have been the personal experience of talking with different colleagues from different countries, and in the last 4 or 5 years, I have seen that most of those people prefer to work with companies from the South, not from the big pharma. I remember the general director of a vaccine company that, due to some ethical point of view, I couldn't say from which country, but this person told me, I prefer to work with South companies and not with the big pharma, because only through collaboration, only through South-South collaboration, we could be independent and we could raise the expertise of our people, and we could continue the work in order that our countries can develop new vaccines, new biopharmaceutical products. That's very interesting, because 10 years ago to say that was impossible. And of course, these type of meetings are very important in order to continue this way. Because only through South-South collaboration and only with the people working not only in the private sector, also in the public sector, could be possible to invest in the production capacities on health sector. The other point that I would like to remark, and it was mentioned before by some of my colleagues, is the quality standards. This is the other point, very important point, because we are talking about products for safe people in some cases, or for sick people. And in both cases, it's very important to invest in quality and standards, on GMP conditions, good manufacturing practice, take into account the World Health Organization guidelines. Today, it's very important to recognize that it's more difficult to invest in the maintenance of this capacity than in the build of this type of facilities. You can invest to build, but it's not enough. You need to take in consideration that in order to keep the GMP conditions, you need to invest yearly a huge quantity of money in order to keep the GMP conditions. That's why it's very important that the political policies could be in a synergy with the private sector. The other point that I would like to remark is that it's very important also to study the cost effectiveness of this type of projects. It has been considered that in order to create a vaccine facilities, it's impossible to do it if the market is very short. You need to take in consideration that for producing vaccines, you need a facility where all those conditions, I mean, research and development, production capacities, quality standards, could be in a very good synergy. And in that case, you need to have a very clear the market, the people that will receive your products. And in this point, again, South collaboration is crucial. And it's crucial because the only way to do that is in order to create synergies, in order to create collaborationships between the different countries. In that case, borders, frontiers are not important. The most important is that people in the different countries could be aware that this investment should be very important for the present and the future of the children and the general population. So, thank you. So, in fact, it's not enough with political will and with the investment capacity of the organizations and the governments. It's very important then to create the conditions that could be possible for everyone to have the opportunity to take the opportunity of receiving good vaccines, good biopharmaceutical products for raising a better quality of life for the people. In the moment that we could develop new alliance and new relationship in terms of South-South collaboration, then for developing countries would be possible to say that they are independent in terms of producing capacities. The best example that I would like to share, and with this I will finish, is in African countries. If you look to Africa, in terms of vaccines, only South Africa, Algeria, Egypt, and in some cases Nigeria can produce some vaccines, and also Senegal with yellow fever. But it's very important that all those countries, with the support of other countries from developing countries, could work together, and with the support of World Health Organization, and with the support of some alliance as Gavi, for example, in order to invest, in order that those countries could have the possibility of producing their own vaccines, their own biopharmaceutical products. thank you very much for your attention, and that were the point of views that I would like to share with you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Uh, you have covered number of issues, important issues. Important is that there should be a network of manufacturers, and when any private company is going to any country, it is very important that political will should be very strongly there, and in that context, PPP model could be quite useful in such cases. You have all mentioned about huge investment required in this particular sector, and therefore effectiveness of any project is very important in that regard. Talked about many other issues. Now, since time is very less, I open the floor for discussion. But primarily, I would seek your comments, particularly on specific suggestions, how we can really improve South-South cooperation. That would be quite useful. Thank you. Please. Let's go.
No, firstly, let me thank the panel. I think they've raised so many important issues that it would take time for us to really get into a meaningful conversation on what needs to be done. Among the issues that I think I want to draw attention, which has not been raised, that the way even these countries have opened since the 90s to investments. So the liberalization and the privatization of policies have impacted on the South-South cooperation. In fact, a lot of people came to believe in the 2000s that the South-South cooperation is less important than South-North cooperation as far as is concerned. And that assumption guided actually a number of developments within at least the country which I am very familiar with, that's my own country, that's India. I can say it with certainty and I can discuss the details. Second is the private sector, when it actually goes to be Africa or Latin America, it doesn't want to really get into joint ventures. I've just now completed a study on the outward foreign direct investment of Indian companies. It prefers wholly owned subsidiaries as well. And also when it sets up wholly owned subsidiaries, the amount of breadth and depth of capabilities that it puts together in those countries is far short of what is actually desirable to have a meaningful cooperation in production or in investment, establishment of new companies. I think so this also then comes in the way of, when you have opened up in a manner that you have become dependent on big pharma, and it's happening so, and I can tell you the brownfield foreign direct investment in India is one such case which I could discuss in detail, and we've just looked at some of the top companies in India were vulnerable as far as, and I don't need to mention, this panel is a very well-informed panel, and it would know what I'm referring to as far as it's concerned. So see, as a result, even the point which Andre made with regard to the ICH, that is, and I think, or even IPR, James, the point which you have raised as far as it's concerned, if you, I'm sorry. In these countries, if you really, just let me step back. The strategic alliances and collaborations which Indian firms have, let's say, entered into, largely are for marketing. They are really not either for R&D or for even production. This is a detailed analysis I've done from 1990s to 2019. So I think while we meet, we need to do an honest appraisal with regard to the South-South cooperation. What are our barriers? How do we facilitate that? A conscious political will, which Pellerino has mentioned, needs to be shown by all actors. The point which Hala made, that is, there are a number of actors whose motives need to be studied, and then saying, how does one facilitate that? So if any suggestions have to be given, as Mohanty is raising that, firstly is let's diagnose the problem. And I think there are elements within the diagnosis which have not been yet factored in sufficiently, and there's an interaction between all these particular factors. One needs to understand, like I showed, autonomous liberalization, when you have taken up how it comes in the way of the kind of relationships that even happen between the South and North as far as it's concerned. And so what to talk of South-South as far as it's concerned. I've heard complaints when I went to Brazil saying Indian companies, are not interested in this, or Indian companies are not interested in that. I'm sure similar complaints would be there for the maybe the other countries' companies as well is concerned. I'm not wanting to single out my own challenge as far as it's concerned. So to cut the story short, I think as far as suggestions are concerned, there is another element of diagnosis. That is, what are internal policies, which might be raising barrier to the larger South-South cooperation. And I think that is true for our cooperation in WTO with regard to IPR. This is true with regard to ICH.
Okay, thank you.
That's all.
Thank you. Dr. Das?
My question is related to the excellent comment made by my predecessor who spoke right now. I'm a scholar working on China. My question relates to China. I'm happy that Mr. Ashok Madan is here. He's associated with the Indian pharma industry. I would like to know what are the major hindrances so far as India's pharma industry's entry foray into China is concerned. Because that is often we bemoan that China is not giving access to its market to Indian pharmaceutical industries. What is that issue? I mean, the normal complaint is that the registration process in China is very complicated, and rightfully, somebody said it was repeatedly mentioned about political will. I think perhaps that is lacking. Political will is lacking. I will be very grateful if Mr. Ashok Madan could throw light on this aspect. Thank you very much.
With your permission.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Das, for this pertinent question. We at India are really concerned as far as China is concerned. Our imports from China are to the tune of around $3 billion. Our exports are only $200 billion. Major trade deficit comes only in pharma here. You have very rightly mentioned about the registration process. It takes around 5 to 6 years time and huge amount of expenditure, around $1.6 lakh per plant and per product registration are required. It's a huge investment. And then the system in China at the moment is so complex in terms of distribution, in terms of hospitals, in terms of insurance benefits, that the companies find it very difficult even to understand the total system. The Chinese would attract the Indian industry to come over there, but then later on we find you are left on your own. Initially, the response is very good. You come, set up the units. Now, there have been offers from the Chinese side. You come and set up the units in China. We will give you the land. We will give you the facilities. We will even construct the building for you as per your requirements. You work it for 5 years. Now, their prime aim is to induce the formulators to come to their land. Because APIs, they have their own strength. They would not like to share nor invite API manufacturers over there. So they are looking to develop their own formulation industry. And then when they are there for 5 years, they say, if you don't like, you can go back. You see, we are a loser in that case. We have gone there, we have worked for 5 years, we have brought our scratch to a working project. And then after 5 years, because the conditions are not conducive, we come back. They say, you don't lose anything. But the question is, we have given them our time, we have given them our technology. That is a great loss for us.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Juliana from Peru. So, and thanks to everyone for sharing your thoughts on this important issue. So, I'm particularly interested in the importance of regulation to boost or also to hinder innovation. And especially I come from the academia, and I've seen that it's kind of missing this approach between regulatory agencies and researchers or
Please
academic.
specify your specific observation, the suggestions.
Pardon?
Your suggestions, any of these three questions.
Okay, question. Okay, so well, my question is, what are the what is the pending agency for this to facilitate the an approach between regulators and academia? And for example, FDA has some mechanisms for pre-IND meetings, and it's very close to academia. And my second point is also that it's necessary to have a balance between strict regulations to ensure quality, to ensure efficacy and safety, but also regulation needs to be flexible enough to stimulate innovation. So how we can face this challenge? Actually, it's a big opportunity for southern countries in this matter. So that's my question. Thank you.
Any other? Okay, please.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Maria Ntemba from Zambia. My question is directed to Dr.
Please
Ruchita.
give your suggestion, your comments we can discuss after this one. But right now, please give your observation or any suggestion, specific suggestion on these three questions.
Yes, I would like to address the issue that Dr. Ruchita talked about on the experience in Africa, and particularly on the issue of medical tourism. My question is mainly on the issue of what kind of facilities, because she mentioned that there's 4 hospitals that have been put up in Africa to address the aspect of Africans coming to seek treatment in India. Now, my observation is that we are not sending everyone for treatment here. It's only specialist treatment that we're looking for. So are those 4 institutions that have been set up in Africa addressing the question that we have, that we need, the specialist treatment? Because we're not coming to India for malaria or for diarrhea diseases. It's for kidney issues, heart diseases and stuff like that. Thank you.
My name is Abdul Brahim. I'm from Chad, Central Africa. My question here is to make South-South and Triangular cooperation more tangible. And my concern here is most of South-South companies or manufacturers don't want to go to Chad or Central Africa there and invest, for example, for laboratory, and also to have a joint venture on setting up hospitals and specialized hospital, I mean. And that is my concern, and how we're going to solve these issues because of low financial capacity, because there is always political will from our Chadian government to help set up this facility, but from south here, people are a little bit reluctant to go down to Africa and set up over there, and they want very fast return on their investment. That is the problem mostly. Okay,
thank you. Now I'll just give, since we have very less time, I'll just give half a minute to all panelists to reply whatever, if they have got anything to reply. I'll start from my left. Would you like to say something? No. Okay. Professor James?
Yeah, I agree with the point, raised by Dinesh on this issue, but liberalization is a larger issue which we may have to explore in a different context. That's why in my remarks I mentioned that we are in this kind of these things. There we have to encourage private entrepreneurs. That's the way out as of now. The other thing is a much larger question. And just one point I wanted to add to that SDG 3 things. Local manufacture will always help in the kind of assured supply, reliability, and local availability of products. So in the SDG 3 point, the local manufacturing is definitely going to help in that matter. S2, I think.
Thank you. Noratla.
Just a few comments. I do agree with Denise, that it has to be an honest appraisal of what are the barriers, and I mean these kind of barriers do change in sectors such as biotechnology. One of the barriers which has not been discussed is how volatile the sector is, in the sense there are firms that are active and then they're bought up by big pharma, and so there's always a changing scene in the sector. It's an interesting point that Indian companies don't want joint ventures, and so I would love to hear more about that from you. The China doesn't give access to market. When we studied cases, they were actually quite strict agreements between firms that had technology, possessed technology, and wanted to gain access to market. So they didn't give their technology free, but it was dependent on access to market, which is one of the sort of principles of South-South collaboration that I find interesting, that it doesn't pretend to be altruistic. It's always there are always many reasons for collaborations, and different forces at play. I will direct the question about regulation and innovation to Andrea, because I have never been able to get a grant to study regulation and innovation. It's a topic I find very fascinating, but I don't have the expert knowledge on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Andre?
Thank you. Very briefly, let me address the issue of intellectual property that has been raised by Professor James as well by the gentleman in the audience, and provide you with an important anecdote. Brazil's response to HIV/AIDS has been considered the best in the developing world by the UN, and it has later been adopted by the WHO as well. It was revolutionary at the time because it was the first to propose that we should treat HIV/AIDS in the developing world. At the time, the WHO, the World Bank, and several other institutions would argue to the contrary. If you have scarce resources, you should not spend them on treatment. Rather, you should direct them towards prevention, which was seen as more cost-effective. Well, Brazil showed that treatment was also highly cost-effective. But anyway, the only reason why Brazil was able to provide treatment, to afford the drugs, was that it produced generic versions of antiretrovirals locally. And the only reason it could produce these drugs was because it imported active ingredients from India. Brazil did not have the capacity to produce these active ingredients, only the final formulation of the drug. But because of importation from India, this program could be created and could be maintained over time. And again, it also incited a lot of initiatives in South-South cooperation between Brazil and Africa, and Brazil and other Latin American countries. So again, this speaks to the importance of South-South cooperation. And it happened through trade. Trade was also pointed out here at the introduction by Professor Mohanty as a mechanism through which the South can cooperate and share the manufacturing of these health-related products. But again, trade is also hampered by intellectual property global governance rules. And in particular, I'm referring to paragraph 6 of the Doha Declaration, which still has not been settled. It has only been used once by Rwanda and Canada, and that would be a mechanism that would facilitate countries that not only do not have the economies of scale to produce these goods, but also do not have the manufacturing capacity. That prevents them from importing from other countries that issue compulsory licenses, that is to say, that makes patent rights flexible. So that's, I think, is an important area of collaboration. And very briefly, the other one, I think we could also learn a lot from Indian patent law. And that nobody here has made reference to that yet in the panel, but it is key. And we have learned a lot in Brazil. Actually, Brazilian organizations have come here and been the first to try to oppose the granting of patents. I'm thinking particularly of the antiretroviral tenofovir in India. And this is, I think it's an important institutional innovation other southern countries can learn from, particularly Section 3D. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Dr. Ruchita?
First, on the question of hospitals in Africa, I think I agree with you that they are mainly, the interest in Africa and mainly on super specialty hospitals, and some of these groups which are going to set up are focusing on super specialty hospitals or on eye care. These are the two areas in which Apollo or Medanta and others are, Shankar Netralaya, they are brand names and they are involved in these areas. Secondly, I do agree when you talked of, sir, that that there are several challenges to South-South cooperation, and specifically in terms of the fact that the Indian private sector is mainly interested in subsidiaries and not joint ventures. This is the case in Africa also. You find that there are mainly subsidiaries in the especially in the pharma field, and less number of joint ventures. You can count them on your fingers. So we need to acknowledge this fact too while we are talking of the kind of barriers which exist in the countries such as in Africa. There are a number of barriers within our country, India too, which also hinder the growth of South-South cooperation. Thank you.
Dr. Valerino? Okay, thank you very much. We are also running short of time. There are plethora of issues. It would be very difficult to summarize, but 4 or 5 issues we can take affront. That from the various presentations, one can very well see that very strong cooperation is existing between developing countries, and I think that could be the basis for South-South cooperation model in the long run. And one can really find out the strategy, how this cooperation process can be strengthened. The other issue could be that the kind of a manufacturing practice, which is very important in many places. GMP is very much there in the manufacturing sector, but further cooperation is there. Dr. Andre said that the production capabilities is not there with many countries, and therefore it is important that that kind of capacity should also be built in other developing countries, and whenever that is not possible in the short run, possibly trade could be the answer, and liberal trade policy can really help in terms of facilitating trade among the developing countries. Political will also coming as a major issue where it is important that public-private partnership can be built around that. What should be the modalities and how should we go about it, I think is a major issue to be examined. Now, laboratory cooperation is also becoming very important for innovation, for testing, and many other issues. This is one which can also be pursued at the level of South-South cooperation. SDG 3 is very important, and this has really provided a space for greater manufacturing within developing countries, and that would really engage local manufacturers in terms of engaging them in producing critical drugs. Thank you. So the panel has really done a very nice job, and they have provided us with many issues. I think we have just picked up certain issues that deserve a round of applause. Thank you very much.